Hi there, Pain Train here, and welcome to part 2 of the best biomes in video games. If you haven't seen part 1, please click the box here to watch it, or click the link in the description. If you've seen it, or for some reason you want to watch part 2 first, then let's go. Let's talk about the factory or industrial setting in games. These environments typically use a lot of metal machinery. They involve assembly lines, dangerous tools and robots, and sometimes dangerous chemicals. A lot of these stages incorporate the factory's tools or machines into progressing forward or solving puzzles. Typically a lot of lifts and pulleys, etc. A lot of the puzzles that this environment can provide are very intricate and interesting, and really push the player into thinking outside of the box and using their brain. These can also be some of the most dangerous levels, sometimes filled with saws and one-hit kill crushing machines. Enemies are usually robotic in nature, but typically from what I experience, enemies are usually secondary to the hazards that the stage itself provides. Sometimes these stages lack a little aesthetic variety. A lot of these stages suffer from being only in grayscale, but with a little effort, some of these games make the factory levels incredibly varied. Music for these settings are usually very robotic, usually mixing in steam sounds and sounds of machines crashing together, usually a very metallic sort of song. Some of my favorite examples are Hot Shelter from Sonic Adventure, Tick Tock Clock from Super Mario 64, Factory Tour from Kirby 64, and Grunty Industries from Banjo-Tooie. While sometimes these stages can be gems, for the most part, I'm not the biggest fan of this setting. Usually they end up feeling pretty similar even across different games, and they're just not as vibrant. Next up is the casino theme. When I first started this project, I did not think there were enough casino-specific environments in games to make this its own category, but this environment has actually been used in a variety of games. Casino levels are typically very bright and flashy, trying to give off the aura of a great party. It's usually filled with different types of games, slots, card games, roulettes. In particular, slots in Sonic 2 is where I figured out that I should not gamble at all. These stages are usually very colorful and eye-grabbing, and provides a nice escape for the player outside of the goal of the game. In turn, that could also be viewed as a negative, where the stages are very busy and there's often too many distractions that take away from its purpose in the game. The music I associate with Casino is usually very bombastic, sometimes very dance party themed, just giving the impression that everyone in the stage is having a grand old time. Some of my favorite examples of casinos in games are Casino Night from Sonic 2, Mesa City from Sly Cooper, the casino area in Hotel Delfino from Super Mario Sunshine, the game corners from Pokemon, and the casino from Cuphead. Overall, I'm a pretty big fan of this theme. Bright colors and bouncy music are definitely positives in my book. And for the most part, I do enjoy having little mini games that can break up the action from the plot in whatever game you're playing. Casino is squarely in my solid tier. Next, we have the Circus or Carnival and theme park environment. So similar to the casino biome, this is another one where having a good time is the core theme of these levels. They're also very colorful and bright, at least on the surface. For whatever reason, a lot of games that use this theme end up tilting it into the slightly or just flat out creepy theme, especially in regards to circuses. Typical enemies can be circus performers, particularly clowns or carnies. Sometimes those prizes from theme parks turned evil and come to life. Or, mostly in theme park zones, the rides themselves can be hazardous. Some of the things that this environment does well are mixing up the areas, keeping it fresh. since there are so many different types of theme parks, different areas in the carnival, and different ways that circuses perform, whether it's animal performance, or freak shows, or acrobatics. I'd say one negative in particular is the overuse of clowns. Now, I'm not really one of those people that hates clowns or thinks they're super scary, but they can be a bit creepy, and when they're always used in these type of areas, and I'm talking about all three, carnivals, circuses, theme parks, they always want to stick clowns in them. It's too much. Music can vary from your typical circus-y type sounds, lots of horns and silly sounds, sometimes used in the minor when they're trying to be creepy. Some of my favorite examples is Carnival Night Zone from Sonic 3, Witchy World from Banjo-Tooie, Crazy Kremland from Donkey Kong, and Twinkle Park from Sonic Adventure. For some reason, even though this theme shares attributes with the casino theme, I typically think about this environment and it comes across negatively. And it's not just because of the clowns. I think it's also because I just don't enjoy the music for these stages typically, and it's one of those, they usually involve tracks that just repeat over and over again. Like, whenever I think of this theme in my mind, all I can think about is the music from Carnival Night and Sonic 3 and how it just goes over and over and over, and I get so tired of it. I definitely put this environment as below average. Next we have the city or metro environment. Strangely, in a lot of games, this environment can be pretty rare. A lot of games go for the fantasy aspect, and having a city area kind of breaks up the fantasy because that's very modern and normal. So it's almost refreshing to see a city environment in a game that has a lot of varied biomes. Obviously, games entirely set in cities, such as Grand Theft Auto, don't apply. A lot of times, typical enemies can be street thugs or car-based enemies. But in many games, this environment's more of an information gathering / transition zone, so it may just not have any enemies at all. One of the things that this environment does pretty well is it can give players a sense of scale within a game, and it contrasts pretty well with other environments such as forests or deserts. Some negatives it has are the settings can become repetitive. You can't really think of many cities that don't just rely on having tall skyscrapers and billboards around. Music is typically upbeat and mixes in some traffic sounds or uses large crowd noise. Some of my favorite examples of this biome are Route 99 Zone from Sonic Advance 3, Corneria from Star Fox 64, Gotham City from the Batman Arkham games, the City from Crazy Taxi, and City Escape from Sonic Adventure 2. When it comes to games that involve a large amount of environments, I really enjoy the breath of fresh air that the city biome gives. And so typically, when it's not a game that's entirely set in the city, I'll usually rank this one pretty high. And here it is, Mr. Bottom Tier itself, the sewer biome. Now take everything that nobody likes about swamp levels and make it super claustrophobic, and there you've got the sewer environment. There are some diamonds in the rough, but for the most part, sewer levels are the filthiest, grossest, worst levels in gaming. It's dark, it's cramped, it's wet, and it's not good water. The enemies are almost always disgusting. Bugs, rats, monsters. It's hard to find much redeemable about these kind of levels. If you like greens and browns that look like they're body fluid, then these are the stages for you. Music I associate with this type of environment is usually bubbling or dripping water sounds, usually mixing in stuff crawling or rats screeching in the background. Some notable examples are Clanker's Cavern from Banjo-Kazooie, the Gasworks from Batman Vengeance, Pipe World from Mario 3, and the Depths from Dark Souls. Obviously, if my rant hasn't made it clear enough, this is the worst one in my opinion. If it's not Pipe World from Mario 3, I don't want to play sewer levels. Next up, we have the jail or prison environment. These behind bar stages are usually stealth or escape missions, survival modes, or settings where you're trying to avoid execution. Enemies are usually prison guards or other inmates, or sometimes pests that inhabit the jail cells. Some things this theme does well are providing high anxiety moments that keep you on your toes. A lot of times high tension in games can keep the player engaged and the experience exciting. This theme usually does not do very well aesthetically. Jails are usually gray with barred doors and windows, and that's pretty much it. The music I associate with these themes are either very depressing tones or the high intensity tunes of a jailbreak. Some notable examples are the Hyrule Castle Prison in Breath of the Wild, Prison Lane from Sonic Adventure 2, Goldman's Prison from Metal Gear Solid 3, Arkham Asylum, and Gerudo Fortress from Ocarina of Time. Now, unlike the last theme, I don't actively dislike these environments. They're just usually not high on my list. I'm not actually a big fan of stealth missions, especially when they're paired with being escort missions. Those are the worst. And aesthetically, they just don't do much for me. Next up are the spooks from the graveyard biomes. These environments are easy to recognize as they're filled with tombstones and burial monuments, often accompanied by creepy churches and undead spirits. Enemies range from your typical ghosts, zombies, bats, crows, and your generic monsters. Like the prison biome, these environments are usually very good at keeping you on your toes and keeping the tension high, whether in a straight up horror game or horror elements in a regular game. The spooks you can get from these levels can go a long way in enhancing your experience with a game. For example, I do not like horror at all. Like, I straight up do not watch horror films ever, and I don't play straight up horror games, but a good scary graveyard in a game is very exciting. When it comes to negatives, I would say a lot of negatives depend on the player. Some players just do not enjoy those type of experiences / scary stuff at all, and so obviously this theme would not do it for them. Some of my favorite examples of graveyards in games are Pumpkin Hill from Sonic Adventure 2, Kakariko Graveyard from Ocarina of Time, Spooky Cemetery from Conker's Bad Fur Day, and Pokemon Tower from the first generation of Pokemon. I would rate these environments as above average. In my experience, a good graveyard can really allow a game's settings to pop and really provide a memorable experience in your game. Here come those people calling me a hypocrite again, because the next environment are haunted houses, which are very similar to graveyards. Both use the horror theming, both share a lot of the same enemies, but I think there are many different examples of these two environments being different settings in games that I was able to separate them. Haunted houses are usually very large mansions that have heavy dealings with the other dimension, usually inhabited by ghosts, haunted paintings, creepy monsters, and evil pianos. This theme shares a lot of pros and cons with the graveyard theme, and usually similar music as well. Usually a lot of high piano sounds, or a very monsters and ghouls haunted dance theme. Some of my favorite examples are Big Boo's Haunt from Mario 64, Luigi's Mansion, Queen Vanessa's Manor from A Hat in Time, Mad Monster Mansion from Banjo-Kazooie, and the Osaka House from Fatal Frame. I would rank this actually a little bit higher than graveyards just because a house can provide a few more unique settings than a graveyard typically, while keeping all of the high tension moments and experiences. Next up is the boat or ship theme. Usually when I think of this environment, I think pirate ships, but I'm also including cruise ships and battleships in this theme as well. For the most part, when I think of this theme, I think of battling enemies on the tops of ships, either jumping from boat to boat or making my way down through the levels of the ship. Enemies include evil crewmates, pirates, and hazardous cannons. Some pros about this theme are usually there can be treasure involved, and so you're rewarded for making your way through these levels. They also can be a very fun and colorful environment, depending on what kind of ship you're on. Some negatives these stages have are they can very easily fall into the enemy spam territory, where the setting is small, so to fill out the environment there are a ton of antagonists being pushed towards you, usually all the same type as well. The music I associate with this theme is usually pirate sounding songs or general sea sounds. Some of my favorite examples are Sea of Thieves, Assassin's Creed Black Flag, Pirate Panic from Donkey Kong Country 2, and the Sand Ship from Skyward Sword. This theme is usually pretty average to me. A lot of times the setting can feel a little too small, and like I said, it can suffer from enemy spam. Usually I'll give it a few more points if it's pirate theme, because I just like pirates. One big reason that this theme isn't higher in my rankings, Rusty Bucket Bay. That place can die. Next up, we're mixing the boat theme with the sky theme and talking about airships. Probably made popular by Mario 3's airships, there have actually been a lot of different examples of this biome in many different games. Usually because of their flying nature, the insides are filled with mechanical gears and robotic parts. Stage hazards can include cannons and guns. Enemies are usually either robotic in nature. These stages do a very good job at making the experience feel, I hate using this word, but epic, very grandeur-like. There's just something about being on a giant ship in the air that makes you feel like you're on a real adventure. A negative I have with this environment, and I see a ton of examples of this being used, are for some reason airships feel the need to bob up and down, and it really messes with the motion of your character and can make some platforming blind or knock you off into the pits below. Music can range from deep and intimidating all the way to fast and intense. Some of my favorite examples are the battleship Halberd from Kirby, Flying Battery Zone from Sonic and Knuckles, the airship from Boo's Fury, Attack of the Airships from Mario Galaxy, and the flying machine from Shovel Knight. I would have this environment right outside the top 10. Having a structure in the air really gives me that sense of scale. It really gives you a sense of accomplishing something in a game. Probably the most iconic environment outside of ground would be the castle theme. Levels in this biome are usually in giant European-style castles, where you're trekking your way from the entrance all the way deep into the throne room. Enemies are usually the antagonist guards, or lava hazards, as many castles have. A lot of times these levels are included as your final area, so they're amongst the hardest levels in the game, with traps, plenty of enemies, insta-kill lava. Some good things that these biomes accomplish, it's really good at giving that game feeling. And what I mean is that castles in real life are more of a distant memory, and so when most people think of castles, they'll think of fictional media where they seem very grandiose, and it feels like the core of the whole game comes down to this one area. And like ground theme, a negative that this environment can have is it being, oh, it's another castle level, and can come across as repetitive and boring. Music can sound very heroic, often involving trumpets, or it can be intimidating, sometimes using the organ. Some of my favorite examples are Hyrule Castle from Twilight Princess, Dr. Wily's Castle from Mega Man, Bowser's Castle from Yoshi's Island, and Castle Wolfenstein. I was having a very hard time ranking this biome, as there are certain examples that are among my favorite levels in games, but for the vast majority, it just feels kind of average. So I'll even it out and just put it at slightly above average. Next is the temple or church environment. It can seem like in more modern games, companies like to steer clear of religious tones, but in many of the retro games, this was just a common setting in many different games across genres. For a lot of games, these places would be safe spaces for your player to rest and recover, as usually enemies are not able to access these areas. And it can also be a place where there are info dumps or a lot of plot progression. Though in some games, notably Zelda, the game acknowledges that these areas are places of worship, they are still enemy strongholds and are filled with hazards and antagonists. Typically, giving a player a place to rest and break up the action can allow the player to not get overwhelmed by the game. Sometimes just being able to stop and think can help you progress. On the other hand, for some players, they wonder why these types of areas exist. If you were going to be playing a game, what's the point in stopping and resting when you could just put down the game? Music is typically very angelic or holy sounding music, chanting or choir sounds. Some of my favorite examples are the Temple of Time from Ocarina of Time, Grand Cathedral from Bloodborne, the Great Temple from Metroid Prime 2, the Church from Mad Monster Mansion in Banjo-Kazooie, and Stone Tower Temple from Majora's Mask. I would slot this in as below average for me personally. I fit into the camp where sometimes it can be nice to have a break in a safe spot in the game, but for the most part, it's used more as a plot element and there's a lack of gameplay in these settings. Next up is the ruins environment, which can typically be associated with the temple and church environments. Usually ruins have architecture that suggests it was once those areas, but is not necessarily bound by those areas or by being a holy place. These areas usually elicit feelings of history being lost or that the current game setting is post-apocalyptic. A lot of these areas are great at getting the player to question the lore of the game. These areas do well at coming off as legendary, and they usually encourage exploration to try to find out what happened to the area. Some cons could be they're just an area with old broken buildings being overgrown with vegetation, and there's not much more besides that. Music I associate with this biome is usually heavy with echoes, more of the same type of sound from the church or temple theme, but much more subdued. Can also use gentle ambience. Some of my favorite examples are Chaos Angel from Sonic Advance 3, Sky Pillar from Pokemon 3rd Generation, the Ancient Ruins from Link's Awakening, Marble Zone from Sonic 3, and Thwomp Ruins from Mario Kart 8. I'm a big fan of lore in my games, so a well done ruins area can really go big in my book. I would pretty solidly place this biome as above average, unless it's Marble Zone from the original Sonic. Sometimes there's those zones in games which makes you just feel real comfy and cozy inside, and for me, those are the small town areas. These areas are a lot of times your starting spot in many RPGs. They can also be a safe spot in many types of games, but while also providing you exploration of the town's buildings and providing information through the townspeople without it being forced upon you like in some areas. You're usually not going to have any enemies in these types of environments unless you've made the whole town mad at you. Small towns can provide you with a break from the isolation that many games have without feeling like it's too bustling like the city environments. These areas usually feel very safe and are a good place for healing damage, but they can be boring if the game makes you stay too long. The music I associate with this environment is usually very calm and soft sounding. Some of my favorite examples are the small towns from Breath of the Wild, Pallet Town and New Bark Town from Pokemon, Pianta Village from Super Mario Sunshine, Riverwood from Skyrim, and Donut from Earthbound. I wouldn't say that this environment is top 10 for me, but it is very comforting and I enjoy the safe feeling, being able to interact with other characters in the game, so I would put it as above average. Next up we have beach biomes. Usually very tropical and fun settings. They're usually vibrant with life and activities. If there are any enemies, they're usually shallow sea creature based. But for a lot of games, these end up being more of your easygoing levels and not too intense. Aesthetically, these can be some of the best looking environments in the game. The sparkling ocean contrasting the warm sand with the tropical trees is just a visual masterpiece. Though I'm sure some people will find a con in any level that involves water, even if it's shallow. Music is usually very tropical based. Instruments used like bongos and tambourines. Some of my favorite examples of this biome are Koopa Troopa Beach from Mario 64, Emerald Beach from Sonic Adventure, the Beach World from Donkey Kong Country Returns, and the beaches from Dead or Alive Beach Volleyball. I would rank this environment probably top 5 for me. Aesthetically it's beautiful, the music is usually great and vibrant. There's just a lot to love about this top tier biome. And finally, we have the futuristic / spaceship environments. And usually with this theme, you're inside of structures you would never see in real life, whether that's wacky spaceships or funky secret bases. These are some of the settings where game designers can go wild with ideas, because a lot of these settings don't exist in real life, and so they're not bound by your typical realism that you'd see in other biomes. And as a result, you're able to see a lot of varied level design, cool new age enemies, and new mechanics that you wouldn't see in other areas. There can be some negatives if these areas play it too close to the vest and it's really just a spaceship, then that can get a little bit boring. But usually games are pretty good at making these areas unique and memorable. Music is usually new age with very weird sounds and mixing. Some of my favorite examples of this biome are Cybertrack from Sonic Advance 3, the Comet Observatory from Super Mario Galaxy, Bobbity Spaceship from Boo's Fury, Galaxy Man Stage from Mega Man, and Sanctuary Fortress from Metroid Prime 2. These stages are usually also amongst my favorite. I would say these are right outside of top 10, with some of the better examples being my favorite levels in gaming. So what do you guys think? Do you have any new thoughts about your favorite environments in games? Do I have any terrible opinions about game biomes? Let me know in the comments, please. And for those of you catching this video soon after it's posted, I'll link a Twitter thread containing the polls of a tournament I'm going to run using these biomes. So please vote and give us a consensus number 1. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. This is one of my favorite topics to discuss, and I had a lot of fun creating these videos. It's very hard for me to talk without a script, but I felt like a script would cause me to lose some of the enthusiasm that I have for this topic. So hopefully I'm able to do some more discussion videos in the future, and hopefully you guys will be there to join me. If you've enjoyed, please drop a like and subscribe, and follow on various social media in the description below. And as always, have a blessed day.